Hi, I'm Robert. Welcome back to another on-the-road video brought to you by ApplianceVideo.com. Stop. Before you begin any repair, unplug the appliance from the wall outlet. It is also recommended that you check for proper voltage. Today we'll be removing and replacing the entire sealed system on the refrigerator side of this SubZero Model 550 refrigerator. It has leaked all the refrigerant out of it. It's a low side leak. Whenever you have a low side leak, you want to replace the compressor with the leaking components, as moisture will migrate into the sealed system after the refrigerant is leaked out, which will damage the compressor. Now the first part of prep work that we're going to do is we're going to remove the machine compartment cover. It's held in place by two number 2 Phillips screws. We're going to tilt the top of the panel forward and raise the bottom and slide the panel out of position. Now we can't reach the power cord because it's behind the machine. So what we do is we look for the gray wires coming in and unplug that Molex, and we have now effectively disconnected power from the unit. Now we have to expose the evaporator and heat exchanger on the inside of the refrigerator. We're going to remove the light cover, which is done by pulling forward on the back side of the plastic cover and down, and it pulls right out. We're going to drop this louvered panel down, removing two number 2 Phillips screws. There's one on each side. And now we can remove our slots in the panel with the pins down the bottom. Slide the frieza control off of the mounting screws on the bracket. And now we can remove the panel completely. Now there are 4 screws, number 2 Phillips, that hold the evaporator to the back wall. There are 2 on each side. You're going to get one at the top that is just below the first elbow from the top. And then the next is just above the last elbow at the bottom. And they'll be in a similar position on the opposite side. Now with the screws removed, what we're going to do is take a tubing cutter. We're going to cut the suction line of the evaporator, which is this tube going up. So we'll get our tubing cutter on the pipe and tighten it down. And you want to snug it, and then rotate your tubing cutter around. And then when it feels loose to turn, snug it again. You're going to keep snugging it as it loosens. And that little blade will cut through the tubing for you. Now, take the tubing cutter off and pull the tube apart. Now, because we're replacing the heat exchanger, I'm just going to take the capillary tube and bend it back and forth until it breaks. Or you can take a pair of diagonal cutting pliers and achieve the same result. Just snip it and the evaporator is removed. We'll set that aside. The next step is I'm going to drop this panel so that it does not impede my removal and installation of the heat exchanger tubing. And there are two number 2 Phillips screws on either side and one in the center in the front. And I'm going to place them approximately where they go in the base so that we don't get confused. The longer screws are going to go in the back, shorter ones in the front. You can always refer back to me saying that. Now, as I undo this last screw, I'm going to support this panel with my hand. Place that screw in the back corner and pull the panel down. Undo the Molex plug, and we will set that panel aside. While we're here, we'll just remove the plumber's putty that was put in place by the manufacturer as a stopgap for air getting through where the piping goes through. Now, in each of the 4 corners of the compressor mounting plate, there are 1/2-inch screws or nuts that hold the compressor onto the mounting bolts that are furnished on the unit. So we're going to need to get those nuts off in order to remove the compressor. Now, once we've got the nuts off, we're going to raise the compressor off of the bolts and just slide it forward like so. And then we'll get our tubing cutter and we will cut the suction line. So now the same thing, you're going to set your tubing cutter on the pipe. Make sure that where you set it, you have clearance to rotate it around. Tighten it down, snug, and start to rotate. Now at this point, we're going to get our torch and we are going to unweld the high side connection here. Get our torch going. And our vice grips so we don't touch the hot metal. And I'm going to put the vice grip around the tubing and then get the torch on the welded connection. And pull it apart. Now, the next thing we want to do is remove this filter dryer. We've traced the pipes back to say that yes, this is the one for the refrigerator side. And we want to get this one out of our way because we need room to be able to move this so I can get the torch behind that welded joint. So now that I moved that one, I'm going to gently move this tubing just enough. I don't really care too much about the dryer itself as not burning anything with the torch. So, at this point, I'm going to take my vice grips and get them around the dryer. And set myself up with enough room that I can pull on that dryer as I unweld it. Now we'll get our torch going. Get in there and heat up that joint on the dryer. And as you see it start to cherry, you pull it down. And now you can just snip off the cap tube on the bottom side. Alright, and the dryer is removed. Before removing the compressor, you want to remove the start components off the compressor, which would be the relay and the wire terminal from the thermal cutout, and just let them lay there. And now we'll raise the compressor up enough to get over the wiring and slide it to make sure your cap tube doesn't get caught on that high side line on the compressor. Slide it all the way out and set it aside. Next step is we want to remove the heat exchanger completely, which is back in this corner right here. So we're going to grasp it from where we cut the tubing off the compressor and drop that tubing down below the frieza tubing. And we are going to pull up on the part of the tubing that goes down through the floor of the machine compartment while bending the upper portion down. And we'll remove that plumber's putty that is hardened up. And we're going to get our cap tube pulled down around, so it doesn't impede our removal of the heat exchanger. Okay, so now we feel some resistance, so we'll go into the refrigerator and straighten out the capillary tube. And we straighten the capillary tube, and then we can go back up and finish snaking it through. And now we'll inch out the final length of the heat exchanger and just snake it around that frieza compressor. And your heat exchanger is removed. Now, before we can install the compressor, we have some prep work we want to do on it. The compressor kit comes with wiring, start device, grommets for the mounting plates, access valve for the compressor, and also this connecting tubing like the old compressor had for the high side. So what we're going to do first is the grommets. We're going to tilt the compressor and we're going to press the grommet into the hole, and then we're just going to kind of twist it a little bit and let it seat, and repeat that process all the way around. Now, first thing you want to do, we're going to be installing the access valve and the connecting tubing. So first you want to clean your brazing rod with some sandpaper, just to make sure that if there's any oxidation on it, you get it off. Because just sitting around, they will oxidize. Now with the brazing rod cleaned, we're going to also clean the tubing that's going to be welded. Now I'm going to turn this so you can see. There are rubber stops that are inserted into the tubing, and we want to remove the high side first and just let that bleed off, because it is shipped with a little bit of nitrogen in it to keep it pressurized so that there's not any moisture in it, and you know there's no moisture in it as a technician when you pull that off and hear it hiss. And then we can take off the low side. And then the access valve port. And turn the compressor back where we had it. We're going to take the access valve, remove the cap, and remove the schrader core so that we don't damage the rubber seal on the schrader core when we heat it up to braze it in place. And our tubing for the high side. Okay, so what I've done is I've made a coupler for the high side line. We're going to braze that into position. Start our torch. Get this side of the joint nice and hot. Now to the other side. Next, we'll braze in the access valve. You want to weld or put your flame on the outer pipe and get it nice and hot. You'll actually be able to see the pipe start to change color. And then your braze will flow like it's supposed to. Now, while that's cooling down, let's go to our heat exchanger. And what we need to do is the part of the heat exchanger with the longest section of capillary tube is the part that's going to connect to the compressor. So we're going to utilize the old heat exchanger, and we are going to simply mold the tubing so that it will fit onto the compressor, much the same as the old one did. And this is to make sure that when you put it in, you're not fighting to get the compressor back in place. So we're just going to curl the heat exchanger slowly but surely till we have a nice bit of a pigtail going on. And now we will loosely place the evaporator in the spot where it's going to go. All right, so now what we need to do is snake the heat exchanger back into place and get that little cap tube up over the freezer piping. And then we'll guide it down into the hole that goes through the floor of the machine compartment and ceiling of the refrigerator. And once that cap tube is gone through, it will start to move a lot easier. Now we're going to snake the refrigerator heat exchanger down in place. Now what I'm doing is I am adjusting the tubing inside the cabinet and kind of straightening it out and seeing how much more distance we have to go to obtain our goal. Looks like about 1.25 feet. Now at this point what I want to do is curl my cap tube around the handle of my driver to neaten up the excess capillary tube. Alright, so I'm fitting the cap tube down into the orifice it's going to go in the evaporator, and I'm going to prop the evaporator and fit my suction line in. Now, you can see some goop around the piping. What that is that's thermal trap paste so that I can stop the heat from going any further. I am also going to use cool gel spray, and I'm going to spray down the back wall of the unit so that we don't burn it up. All right, so now with that cool gel in place, we're going to take our thermal blanket, spray it, and put it behind the piping as an added measure of protection. And we'll let that take the heat from the flame as opposed to the wall. I'm using 45% silver solder on the joints to the evaporator, as the solder will flow at a lower temperature rate than the braze. So that way I don't have to damage anything. Now we'll get a little flux on our tubing, which will help the solder flow better. And I am taking a moment with a paper towel to wipe the cool gel spray off the back wall. Now, we're going to get a screw into the evaporator to mount it. We'll start on the right-hand side, and we'll get the bottom screw in. We're going to pull down on our heat exchanger. So we can line up our screw holes on the opposite side. We'll move this evaporator out of our way. And we'll get the top screw on this side in. And the bottom screw. And then we'll come back over to this side and get the upper screw. Fully tighten this screw. And now we'll move on to the top. Now what you want to do is take all this excess cap tube and you want to wrap it around the handle of your driver. Not so tight that you can't get it off. Because all you want to do is neaten it up a bit. Now when you come to the end, you can slide the wrap down and continue on. And then we'll slide the tool out. Continue to wrap by hand. Now that we're getting inside the machine compartment, now that that's wrapped, now we're going to bring the compressor in and fit it with the suction line and high side line. So we want to get it over the wires, but under the freezer cap tube. Get it as far back as we can. Kind of get it set to where it is going to sit. Now we need to take our suction line You take the cap off of it, the rubber cap. And finish adjusting our position of that tube to meet with the port coming out of the compressor for the suction line. Now that we have the new compressor back in place somewhat, we're going to weld that suction line back together. So what we're going to do is get in with our inspection mirror and have a look and make sure that we've got a good bead of solder or brazing rod all the way around. Alright, so now we're going to get the high side line brazed together. Alright, so now we're onto the filter dryer, and because of the confined space, I've pinned it into the other dryer just so I can get the cap tube first, as it would be too close to the floor. So let's get our torch going. Okay, now we're going to breathe in the top part of the dryer. I've got the dryer in position. I'm going to heat it up and push the two pipes together. All right, so now let's weld in the top part of that dryer. Now that this side's cooled down, we'll put the schrader core back into the access valve that we'll need to evacuate and charge the unit with. And then we can go ahead and install the electricals on the compressor. Okay, so we put together our run capacitor. We put our relay on the compressor with our overload protector. Now we're going to take the wires that were on the old compressor, and what you want to do is take the wire that comes off of the overload and you want to connect it to the overload protector that you just put on the compressor. Then you take the white wire off the relay and connect it to the white. Let's go underneath that capillary tube. You want to connect the white wire to the white jumper that you connected to your relay. Now we can install the compressor cover. We're going to take our wires and route them through this channel in the side of the cover. Then slide our cover into position and press it till it snaps into place. Now we'll just take a second to dress our cap tube. And then when I'm done, I'm going to strap that with a wire tie up out of the way. At this point, we're going to hook up the gauges to the access valve and put our vacuum pump on and leak test. Okay, so we're going to connect our suction gauge hose to the access valve. And we'll power on our gauges, and we will move the refrigerant scale to the proper refrigerant. 414. And next I will connect my vacuum pump. Now we'll connect our process hose and connect to the vacuum pump. And turn on the vacuum pump and open the low side port. And install our schrader core back into the filter dryer and reinstall the schrader core into the filter dryer. Now we'll take our high side hose and connect it to the filter dryer. Okay, so my low side gauge is out of calibration slightly, but we vacuum pumped the system down. It's stable, it's holding at the same pressures. We let it sit for about 5 minutes and the pressures did not change. So now we're ready to measure the charge in with a digital scale. And let's go ahead and do that and then we can pin it up. I've got some plumber's putty. I'm just gonna roll it in my hands until it becomes a rope, and then I'm going to reach back and stuff it in around the heat exchanger that we just put in. And stuff it up inside the hole. Now we can start putting the inside of the refrigerator together. We'll starting with the light and fan shroud panel. We're going to plug in the Molex. Then we're going to get the panel up in place. So, we get our front screws started on this side. Then, get our back screw in this corner. Now we'll move over to the other side and we'll reposition the freezer cold control into the panel. Okay, so I got the new cold control installed, or the freezer cold control installed, I should say. And now I'm going to put the mounting nuts back on. And then we'll plug the wires back in. Now we will line up our slots in the panel with the pins down the bottom. That side in, yep. So just this side there. screws here to hold that panel in place. Alright, so now we'll reinstall the light lens panel. And it slides into the lip in the front here. And then you pull it towards you and press up and it locks in place. Now we'll clean up our area. And the customer can put everything back in the way they want it. And that completes the repair. Thank you for watching another quality video brought to you by ApplianceVideo.com.